Welcome to episode 4 of The Accursed. This is a story you are going to want to listen to from the beginning. If you're just jumping in now, I suggest you go back to episode 1 and start there. This podcast shares some scares and frights. It also delves into some adult themes. Specific content warnings are in the show notes of each episode. Be sure to check there so that you can honor yourself and your boundaries. Today, I want to share with you a story that is both one of my favorites and probably the one that has gotten to me the most. Though, to be fair, I scare pretty easily. I'll tell you a little more about why I love/am terrified of this one in particular after I read it to you. When I was 10, Mama left me at Gran and Pop's for a long spell. It was not the first time. Wouldn't be the last either. Mama never did quite take to being a mother. She liked the show of it, to be sure. A cute baby on her hip was a fun game to play at, just like grieving widow was. But the rest, me, put a cramp in her style. So for stretches at a time, I would be the ward of either my grandparents or my mama's sister Grace. Meanwhile, Mama did whatever the hell she wanted, usually drinking or having a dalliance with whatever man caught her fancy until she got bored with them. Mama had tried for a few months then, I'll give her that. It might have been the last time she tried at all. She'd gotten a job at a bank, and we lived in an apartment where I had my own bed near the window. One time, she even bought me a pretty pink party dress, and we went for high tea, dressed up like two regular society ladies. But Mama started making eyes at her manager and coming home well after dark. I tried to be a good girl. I tidied up, didn't sass, and was polite when he came over to meet me. Shook his hand and everything. But then, one night, she came home from work to find me talking to the neighbor girl who kept me company when Mama worked late, and Mama started yelling, told me that there was no one there, that I was talking in thin air, and that no girl lived next door, and that I needed to just stop. I remember Mama running into her room in tears, and I had to apologize to Molly, that was her name, and tell her to go home. Mama never did like me having friends. 2 days later, Mama's new manager friend, Mr. Webb, drove us out to the homestead. She said it would be better for me out there because she'd be working late a lot and that I shouldn't be staying home alone so much. Mama hugged me on the porch steps and put on a show of crying, saying how she was only trying to do right by me. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard, but I did not cry. Not even when I tasted blood on my tongue. I was proud of that. I stood and watched the dust kick up as Mama and Mr. Webb drove away. I remember Gran running right outside with the broom, shooing the crows away that had gathered at my feet. She was a superstitious sort and believed that the crows brought death, but that's not how it is at all. It's just that the crows can hear death and her whispers. They speak a tongue of the same root, and so they know. They follow the reaping out of kindness for souls that might get lost on the way. The crows are made of shadow, you know. They can flicker beyond and back if they need. Gran tried her damnedest to chase those crows away, as if they were the ones that could keep death at bay. As if they would listen to her. I wondered for a long time if those crows were there to pick up Aunt Agnes, who shared the bed with me when I had to stay in the front room. She wasn't there most nights, just when the moon shone just so through the slats on the window. Only then would I see her. She would cough and moan. Bellyaching is what Gran would have called it if it were me, but we weren't allowed to talk about Aunt Agnes. I asked once about how come Aunt Agnes could keep me up all night with her hacking, and Gran's lips just narrowed into a straight line. She turned right away and went to talk to Pop out back in the shop. I slept upstairs in Mama's old room after that. That summer, the crows started following me. At first, they were just on the windowsill each morning, tapping on the glass like they were trying to wake me up. Gran yelled at me to stop feeding them, but I swore then, as I do now, I did not feed them a thing. They were just there, at the window, on the steps, in the yard, and if I stayed very still, they would tell me secrets about whatever they heard when death opened the door. They knew when the first sun rose and how to sing the song of the night. They stayed close, no matter what Gran did, leaving offerings of feathers and berries in their wake. I tried to tell all this to Gran, but she told me to stop with my nonsense. Even when they found that old charm she'd lost in the garden, she wanted none of it from me. I kept it tight in my hand and put it under my pillow, figuring one day she'd be ready. Gran was on edge that summer. She stopped sending me outside to get me out from under her. She made me stay in the kitchen and listen to that old crackly radio. It made no difference to the crows. They would wait in the drive, on the roof, at whatever window I happened to be nearest. The dog didn't like 'em much either. Maggie would bark and growl, but they paid her no mind, sometimes squawking back as if it were a game. The weather had just started to turn when Gran gave me a plate of lunch and told me to bring it to Pop out back and not to dawdle. I did as I was told. But the crows, they waited on the porch, blocking the door of my return. They made a ruckus, and I knew they would only settle if I sat down right there with them. I don't know what else I was supposed to do. I don't know if Gran heard the commotion or if I'd just taken too long, but she came outside, ready to snatch me up from wherever I was. I don't think she expected to see me right there. She hissed and grabbed my arm. I'm sure I should have jumped up, right up, but I was startled, and I didn't want to be rude. I'd only just sat down. I hollered when she yanked my arm. Of course I did. She'd scratched me with her nail by mistake, and it smarted. I must have scared the crows something good because they started hopping around and screaming. Two of them, who had been watching from the eaves, swooped down right at Gran. She swatted them away, but one got her on the shoulder with his talons. It was the only time I'd ever heard her cuss. I offered to clean the cut for her, but she just sent me to my room for disobeying. When Gran died, I sat under the bed, holding onto Maggie tight, trying to make sure she didn't run off and leave me alone. There were others there, not under the bed, of course, but others singing songs and saying their goodbyes. Others bringing food in for folks who were never going to touch it. Others still hanging thick blankets from the windows, trying to block out the caws of the crows. If anyone would have bothered to ask me, I would have told them it doesn't work that way. Gran had gotten sick quite quickly. The cut on her shoulder grew hot and swollen. She had to take to bed soon enough, where she had fits from the fever. She was not one for doctors, so Pop and I tended to her with a poultice and cold compresses. The crows began to flock on the roof, cawing and waiting. When Aunt Grace came for supper one Sunday, she almost fainted seeing Gran and insisted that Uncle Arch go fetch the doctor right then and there. But I knew who the crows were singing for. I knew what the doctor would tell them. I knew that the door was open and there was no going back. Someone got in touch with Mama. She and Aunt Grace held Gran's hand. Watching her look around the room to see where Gran's jewelry box was made my tummy ache, and so I crawled under the bed with the dog that had once never left her side and now only wanted to know where she was. I tried to listen to the crows, but Gran was too loud. Her breath rattled and she moaned like Aunt Agnes had, Aunt Agnes who stood in the corner saying nothing. It took hours, but in time the quiet came. Even the crows stopped their racket. There was nothing until the wail escaped my mother's mouth. That sound pierced my skin and sent me running down the stairs and right out of the house, the dog at my heels. Maggie and I sat under the willow in the yard and watched as the crows lined the old stone fence. The woods began to shimmer. Without wind, the leaves started to dance, shaking back and forth. The rustling filled the air, but under that was a hum, one I could feel through my whole body. It was low, deep in the earth. I wanted to lay down, heart to ground, and feel it even more, but the moment I tried, a crow cawed so loudly that I froze and stayed right in my place. I don't know when it happened, not exactly, but I turned my head and there was Gran, alone in the yard like me. I tried to stand again, to run to her, but that crow said no, and I listened. Gran didn't see me. She just started to walk down the length of the woods, the length of the fence. The trees at the edge leaned in. The hum began to reach out to her. It licked at her heels like fire, and she would turn towards the woods, taking a step closer, rather than following the path forward. The crows would caw and caw, screaming at her. I saw her startle, recoil, and then continue on as she began. On the path the crows lined. This happened over and over, the crows and their screeching. She passed me, not even turning her head. 3 steps more and she was gone. The wind blew and the crows left. And again Maggie and I were alone in the yard. Years ago, there were crows that used to peck on the skylight above my bed when it was time for me to wake up. Literally, metaphorically too. They would stand there above me until my eyes opened, till I got up. I would go outside sometimes to try and see them, but they would almost always have already flown off. There were crows that croaked loudly outside my door, calling out from the telephone wires whenever I was in a loop, when I was tangled and caught in whatever story my brain was spinning. Whenever I couldn't find myself, they didn't stop until I did. If I went outside to say thank you, they would glare at me as if making sure I was real. I would leave them peanuts and fruit, but I never saw them take them. Those crows came back to me just the same, several times a week. It was by no means an occasional occurrence. I remember it feeling like a gift I couldn't quite explain. That time in my life was woven with change and wonder and doubt and possibility. Some days it felt unnavigable, but those crows helped me find my way every single time I got lost in myself. For months on end, I don't really remember them stopping, except in hindsight, I know that they did because they don't do it at all anymore. I can't even tell you the last time I had one tapping on the skylight, any bird really, until, of course, I got this story about 3 months ago. When I walked back to the house from checking the library and grabbing the envelope, there were two crows sitting on the edge of my roof. We watched each other as I stepped onto the porch. When I sat down, they flew to the telephone wire where we could continue to watch each other. The crows perched on the wire until I was almost done. As Gran started our walk, the crows above me started cawing. I jumped at the sound of them. I stood because sitting somehow made me feel vulnerable. I looked up at them and they flew off. The crows don't scare me. I mean, okay, the cawing did get me that day. But the last time they hung around, it was mystical, for lack of a better word, like a spark of magic just for me. They helped me to stay with myself when I was struggling. Since then, their presence has held a density for me, like they feel important, something I should always pay attention to. There have been a few other instances with the crows since then. The following day, when I got out of the shower, I heard a tapping and scraping sound coming from above. I knew that noise. I knew exactly what was happening. I was a little surprised to realize that the crows weren't on the skylight in my bedroom. They were above the one in my living room. That had never happened before. But there they were, right above me, two crows hopping about. One was pecking rhythmlessly on the skylight. The other was dropping a twig on it over and over. They noticed me after a minute and just looked at me before cawing a bunch and flying off. They've come back 5 or 6 times since then. I've tried to pay attention to my mood and inner experience, but I can't seem to find a pattern. It was a challenging summer for sure. I was dealing with some health stuff and recovering from surgery, but I just never got the sense that they were trying to do what they did last time, wake me up. I mean, they literally weren't making me up this time, but it felt different. And other than not always feeling great physically, I was doing pretty good. There was one time I did feel a little uneasy when they showed up. It was about a month and a half ago. I'd had surgery like 2 weeks before, so I was moving pretty slowly. I just started working on this podcast. It was late morning, almost noon, and I've been going through the stories that I'd received up until that point. I was rereading them and trying to figure out how I wanted to best share them and frame this whole thing. I'd sketched out some ideas before, but this was the first time I had pulled out the envelopes with the intention of working on the podcast. And even though it was my friend's suggestion to do this, I didn't tell anyone I was actually doing it, not even my friend. I wanted to be like, surprise, this is what I did while convalescing. I say that because I felt like I was in this little bubble by myself. I felt really safe and creative. That day, though, I was more than a little on edge due to reading so many stories all at once. I had not done that in a while. I was laying in bed taking some notes when I heard that particular scratching that let me know something was on the skylight. I was curious for sure, but I was not about to get up. I was cozy and things hurt when I moved. The noise didn't let up, though. The scratching got louder. I could hear whatever it was pecking on the glass, seemingly more insistent as time went on. It sounded a little different than it had in the past. So after about 5 minutes, I started to wonder if whatever it was could do damage to the skylight or if they were picking at the roofing shingles. So begrudgingly, I got out of bed and very slowly made my way into the living room. I looked up, and sure enough, it was a crow. It was hopping about, flapping its wings in a way that would often make them hit the glass. I think that's what made the sound I wasn't accustomed to. There was something about whatever that crow was doing that I did not like. I thought about getting a broom and trying to bang the skylight, but I didn't think I could reach, and also I couldn't do it without hurting myself. The crow stopped rather suddenly and looked down at me. Or at least that's what it felt like. It felt like it was looking right at me. In my head, I said, "If you have something you're trying to tell me, tap 3 times on the glass." The crow was totally still for a few seconds, and then, you guessed it, tapped 3 times. The frozen feeling of shock gripped me. I started to shake. The only thing I could think to do was close my eyes and do some box breathing, which is exactly what I did. And when I opened my eyes back up, the crow was gone. I put the stories back in the little box that I keep them in and crawled right back into bed. Just to be clear, I was 100% on prescription painkillers that day. So I am happy to chalk it up to that, but I'm also reasonably sure that I didn't hallucinate what had happened. There have been no other crow-related weirdness since then, though there was one on the skylight in the living room this morning. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions or ideas as to what is happening, I would love to hear them. You can email me at joanna@theaccursed.com. Until next week, goodbye. The Accursed is written, created, and all around conjured by me, Anna Dane. You can find out more about the show at theaccursed.com or on Instagram at The Accursed Podcast. You can find out more about me at Anna Dane. The intro and outro song, Cathedral, is provided by Moby Gratis. Want an extra bonus story? Sign up for our mailing list at theaccursed.com and one will be delivered right to your inbox. If you like the show, there are 2 ways you can help us out. First, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you happen to listen. Second, share us with other folks in your world who might also love a ghost story. Thanks again for listening. Bye.